The sun was beginning its slow descent over the streets of Sacramento, painting the sky in streaks of molten gold and soft amber. The city pulsed with end-of-day traffic, horns, hums, and hurried commuters. But inside one sleek gray sedan, serenity reigned. Eric Porter sat behind the wheel, his tie loosened, his posture relaxed, and the faint hum of jazz whispering through the speakers. He'd had a long day at the office and was ready to trade fluorescent lights for the quiet comfort of home. As he approached an intersection, the yellow light ahead blinked, warning him to slow down. He eased his foot on the brake and came to a stop, just as the light turned red. And then, the siren. Blue and red lights ignited behind him, splashing across his rearview mirror like a sudden storm. Eric frowned, confusion flickering across his calm expression. He glanced in the mirror again. A police cruiser, close, too close. He sighed softly and steered his car to the side of the road. The cruiser rolled to a stop behind him, engine growling low. A door opened. Out stepped Officer Bradley Larson, mid-30s, sharp buzz cut, squared shoulders, and a badge gleaming proudly against his Navy uniform. He walked toward the sedan with a swagger that carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent years being obeyed without question. "License and registration," he said, voice clipped and flat. Eric nodded once, reaching calmly into the glove compartment. His movements were deliberate, controlled. He passed the documents through the open window. Larson's eyes lingered on him longer than necessary, scanning his face, his suit, the leather briefcase on the passenger seat. Something about the scene didn't fit the narrative in his mind. A man like this, driving this car on this street. He didn't say it, but Eric could feel it. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Larson asked, leaning slightly closer. "I'm not entirely sure, officer," Eric replied, his tone polite but steady. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Larson said. The words were automatic, but the hesitation behind them betrayed uncertainty. "I slowed down," Eric said evenly. "I thought it was enough, but I understand." Larson nodded once, but he didn't move. His stance shifted, a subtle tightening of posture, a narrowing of gaze. The silence between them stretched. It wasn't just a routine stop anymore. Larson looked down at the license. "You're not from around here, are you?" "I moved a few months ago," Eric replied. "My address should be updated on that license." But Larson wasn't listening. His questions began to sound less like protocol and more like interrogation. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Home, home," Larson repeated, almost tasting the word. He didn't like the calmness in Eric's voice. It unsettled him. People usually stumbled, fidgeted, offered excuses. Eric simply existed. Calm, self-assured, unbothered. "Step out of the car," Larson said suddenly. Eric's hand tightened briefly on the steering wheel, but his face betrayed nothing. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" I said, "Step out of the car." The words carried the faint tremor of frustration, not authority. Still, Eric obeyed. He opened the door and rose, tall and composed, his crisp shirt catching the last glow of sunset. Larson's eyes flicked up and down. The tailored suit, the calm posture, it all clashed with the image he'd already formed. "Hands where I can see them." Of course, Eric's tone carried no sarcasm, no challenge. Only clarity. Larson circled him slowly, each step crunching against the asphalt. "You can never be too careful," he muttered. "Careful with what?" Eric asked softly. "Men in business suits driving home from work." The question landed like a spark. Larson's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone." "I'm simply asking," Eric said. "Transparency matters, doesn't it?" Larson stared at him, studying his every word. This man wasn't afraid. That wasn't normal. It wasn't how these stops were supposed to go. "Turn around," Larson said, voice sharp now. "Hands on the hood." Eric hesitated only a second before complying. The metal was warm beneath his palms. He heard Larson's boots move closer, the sound of his gloves adjusting, the brisk pat-down that followed. It wasn't just a search, it was a test. Larson wanted a reaction. A flinch, a spark of anger. Anything. But Eric gave him nothing. When it was done, Larson stepped back, his tone clipped. "You're clean." "Of course," Eric replied, turning slowly. "Are we done?" Larson's composure cracked. "Not yet. You seem to know a lot about police procedure." "You some kind of lawyer?" A faint smile touched Eric's lips. "Or something." The ambiguity hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Larson took a step closer. "You think you're smarter than me?" Eric met his eyes, calm, unflinching. I think fairness matters, officer. And so far, I haven't seen much of it. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Larson's gaze wavered, then hardened. People like you always... He stopped himself, the rest of the sentence choking in his throat. Eric tilted his head slightly. People like me? Larson froze. The street noise around them, a car horn in the distance, the wind whispering through trees, seemed to vanish. Eric's voice dropped, steady but edged with steel. Officer, I think it's time you knew who I am. Larson scoffed. I don't care who you are. Then you should, Eric said, reaching slowly into his jacket. I'm reaching for my badge. Larson's hand twitched toward his holster. Eric ignored it. He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. The gleam of the badge caught the fading sunlight. Eric Porter, he said, Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division. The words hit harder than any confrontation. Larson's confidence evaporated, leaving behind only disbelief. Yes, Eric interrupted. I oversee officer conduct. Larson stepped back, color draining from his face. Eric continued, his tone even but unrelenting. The most troubling part of this stop isn't your profiling or your escalation. It's that you didn't even realize who you were talking to. You assumed ignorance. You assumed weakness. He paused, his gaze unwavering. And that's what's broken. Larson couldn't speak. His throat worked silently like a man trying to swallow regret. The badge, Eric said quietly, doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone. He took his license and registration back, turned, and slid into his car. The engine purred to life. Larson stood motionless in the middle of the street as the sedan drove away, his own reflection flickering faintly in the car's polished surface, a man staring at the collapse of his certainty. That night, the scene replayed in Eric's mind. Not because it was rare, but because it was far too common. And this time, he had the power to change it. The next morning, the sunlight poured through the blinds of Eric's office. On his desk sat a file stamped, Officer Bradley Larson. Eric flipped it open. The complaints were there. Unprofessional conduct, excessive stops, vague misconduct brushed aside. Nothing surprising, but this time it wouldn't be ignored. He called his assistant. Schedule me with Chief Daniels. This afternoon. When the meeting came, Eric told the story without emotion, just truth. We can't keep handling these things quietly, he said. Quiet doesn't fix anything. Quiet lets it fester. The chief nodded slowly, the weight of it clear in his eyes. You're going to ruffle feathers, Eric. Good, Eric said. It's about time someone did. Weeks later, his words had turned into motion. Department-wide reviews, training reforms, community forums where citizens spoke and officers listened. And amid it all, Officer Larson sat through his own hearing. No swagger, no confidence, just silence and consequence. But Eric knew this wasn't about punishing one man. It was about rebuilding the culture that allowed men like him to exist unchecked. Months later, under the bright lights of a community event, Eric stood before a crowd of officers and citizens. Justice, he said, his voice strong and sure, isn't just about catching the bad guys. It's about ensuring the ones who wear this badge do so with integrity, fairness, and respect. Applause erupted. But Eric didn't smile. He simply nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement of a battle begun, not won. Because change, he knew, didn't start with outrage. It started with accountability, and sometimes all it took was a single traffic stop to turn a career into a calling.